It's late August, and unfortunately that means that summer is coming to an end. But the indoor DIY season is just about to kick off. So if you're thinking about saving some money by doing some tiling yourself, you're in luck. This is my complete guide and everything you need to know about tiling a wall. Before you can think about doing any type of tiling, you're going to need some tools, and at number one is a good quality tile cutter. This needs to be at least as long as the longest cut you're expecting to make, and you may want to go a little bit bigger so you've covered yourself for future projects, because big tile cutters can cut small tiles but definitely not the other way round. And to finish the cuts off, a tiling file will help you create a nice smooth finish. So we've prepared our tile, so we need to mix up some adhesive, and for that I would highly recommend purchasing a paddle mixer like this. This is the sort of thing that fits on the end of a cordless drill, and this will take the effort out of mixing for you. It's going to speed it up and means that the end product is going to be a lot more consistent if you use one of these. Once your adhesive is mixed, to get it on the floor or the wall consistently, I would also recommend using a notched trowel. To also cut around objects, a tile scribe and nippers can come in really useful to shape tiles around awkward corners. And to finish off, a grout float with a spongy base that's just right for grouting. As well as these specific tiling tools, there's some general building tools you're going to need as well, like a tape measure, spirit level, a sponge and a bucket for mixing your adhesive. Obviously the first thing we're going to need is something to measure with. A tape measure like this reads in both metric and feet and inches, and although there's no particular reason why you can't still measure in feet and inches, all the tiles in the UK these days will be sold per square metre. So if you're going to do this calculation manually, I would suggest not only keeping with the metric system, but keeping everything measured in metres, not centimetres or millimetres, because it's very easy to get the zeros messed up. And before you know it, you're ordering a whole lorry load of tiles just to tile your downstairs toilet. So let's run through a couple of examples of me measuring up my walls here in my bathroom. This wall that the bath is on, I want to tile right up to the ceiling and a bit beyond the end of the bath on the right hand side. So that dimension is 1.8 metres and floor to the ceiling is 2.4 metres. So the wall in total equals 4.32. But we're not going to tile behind the bath. Then we can take that off of the whole wall and save some tiles. So the obstruction, which is actually the bath, is 1.6 metres long by just over half a metre high, which equals 0.864. We can take that away from the wall and work out exactly how many square metres of tiling we need. 3.456. So I'm going to round it up and say it's 3.46. However, if I just had 3.46 square metres of tile now and I tiled this, I would actually end up short. Why? Because of wastage and cuts. Every time I make a cut against the wall or the ceiling or the bath, I'm going to lose a little bit of tile. Now to get around that, we need to add some tiles in to cover us for that wastage. And I would recommend adding in 10% to that number just to cover you for that. So we need 3.8 square metres of tiles. Before we just jump right in and start sticking these on the wall, it's worth investing a little bit of time thinking about the layout, that's the pattern of how they all fit together, and the setting out. And all that means is where we start them left and right, which will dictate where this joint is and how it interacts with things like doors and corners, and up and down, which will fix that horizontal joint and how it interacts with the floor or the ceiling or maybe under a windowsill. Before we decide on the setting out though, we do need to fix the tile layout. You see, unless we know the tile layout, we don't know where the joints are going to lie. So I'm just laying out different patterns here on a board on my workbench. So after trying different patterns from linear to basket weave and herringbone, I finally decided on this brick bond pattern, which is quite traditional with these metro type tiles. So now I've fixed the pattern, I can look at how to set these out on the wall. A great tip here is to first make a gauge rod, sometimes called a story stick or a story pole, which helps you see the layout of the tiles without having to keep measuring. And all it is a stick with the joints marked accurately on it, including the gap between each tiles for the grout. All I do is to transfer the joints on the tiles to the stick accurately, so I can offer it up to the wall and then see where the joints are going to fall. So what I've marked on this gauge rod is each tile accurately, and because I know that I'm going to do a brick bond pattern, I've also marked on the alternating courses. So now I can see exactly where each joint is going to lie on every single course. Next, I'm going to mark the centre of the wall and the centre of any important features such as this window, so I can offer up the rod to see where the tile joints are going to end up. I'm doing this for two reasons. Firstly, so I don't end up with small slithers of tile in the corner. And secondly, for a feature like this window, I think it's going to look better if the tiles are centred on it so it all looks symmetrical. So we have our tools and we know the layout, probably more than just one tile over a new build sink. But what adhesive are you going to use? There's so many different types. There's powdered, pre-mixed, white, grey, fast setted. Let's go through them, starting with pre-mixed. So obviously the main advantage with pre-mixed adhesive is you don't have to mix it yourself. However, it's only suitable for small ceramic wall tiles. So you're not going to be able to use this for a floor and most porcelain tiles, or for any tiles bigger than around about 300 millimeters square. So for larger ceramic tiles or porcelain tiles or anything on the floor, you need to be looking at the powdered format. In this range, both white and grey adhesive is available. So why the different colours? Well, white should be used for light coloured tiles and the grey for dark coloured tiles, just in case the adhesive squeezes through between the tiles, then it at least match the grout that you're going for. And if you're using any natural material tiles, then you need to go for white, as some of these can be semi-translucent and therefore best to have a consistent white background rather than grey. And lastly, for the powder range, there's standard and rapid set, which does exactly what you'd expect it to, meaning you can grout quicker and potentially finish the job in a single day. However, there's always a drawback, and the drawback is the same as the advantage. It actually goes off quickly. And after mixing, you've only got a workable time of around 60 minutes. So my advice would be to standard DIY, unless you really need to finish quickly and you think you can keep up with this type of material. Go for the standard set. It's going to take longer to go off, but you're going to have a lot more workable time. It's going to be a lot easier to use. Mixing powdered format tile adhesive is easy and something that every DIYer can do. You see, it's quite a forgiving compound, so when you are mixing it, if it's a bit wet, just put in a bit more powder, and the other way around, if it's a bit dry, just a bit more water. Rather than mixing a whole 20-kilogram bag of adhesive, which will be a huge amount of material to work with, I'm just aiming to mix around about a third of a bag here. So I've started by putting a third of the recommended amount of water in the bucket. With powder-based adhesives, the powder is always added to the water, never the other way round. So add some and give it a mix and see what the consistency is like. I suppose you can say the consistency I'm looking for is more peanut butter than melting ice cream. A peanut butter type mix will stick nicely to the wall without slumping down, which also means when you use a notched trowel, the ridges keep their shape. Right, ready to start. But where are you actually going to start from? You need to double check that whatever the bottom tile is sitting on is level. I checked this plinth and it was absolutely spot on. That's why I started here. But floors, man, floors, they're just never level. Here I'm starting my tiling on a straight level batten, as floors are never exactly even, so you shouldn't trust them. So I screw a batten onto the wall, one tile up from the bottom, And once I've finished my tiling, I can go back and remove the batten and just fill in the bottom row. With this done, I can start mixing and spreading my adhesive. I trowel it on with the flat side of my trowel first, and at this stage I'm aiming to cover just enough of the wall to lay maybe 2 courses of tiles. With the notched edge of the trowel, I then carry out a final pass, leaving the adhesive with ridges ready to accept the tiles. It's important that these ridges are all in the same direction, which will help them push out the air and collapse as they should do. A small area of adhesive can be wiped away so you can see exactly where the joint line is, and then line the tiles up with this. The first row here is sitting directly onto the batten. I give each tile a small push and twist to help collapse the ridges in the adhesive, meaning that I've got good coverage between the tile and the wall, and then I use a 3mm spacer to separate them evenly. The next course I start on the other vertical line I've drawn onto the wall and use spacers under the tile so everything is lined up evenly. And as you're fixing tiles like these, it's important that the adhesive doesn't squeeze out of the grout joints between the tiles, because if it does, you're going to have a real problem getting the right colour grout into those joints. You really want them clean and open, ready for grout. So when I place a tile, I place it right in the corner against the 2 tiles that I want it to touch, and then give it a push and just make sure that we've got around about 3mm either side. I can then come back with my spacers, pop those in, and it means that I've got a nice clean joint through here with no squeeze out of any grout. And I would always recommend leaving your tiling overnight to cure and gain some strength before you do anything else. I tiled this yesterday, so now this has all gone off and I can retrieve my leveling clips ready for my next tiling exploit. The tile is simply slipped in and the cutting wheel aligned with the cut line and then scored, and with a quick push down the tile will simply snap along this line. Using one of these is simple and requires very little effort and pressure, so look at it as just giving the tile a light score and you'll find the tile snaps along your line time and time again. And just a quick tip, if you're cutting a thin strip from a tile, make sure that when you snap it, you're putting pressure on the end of the tile rather than the centre, which can break the 2 thin strips in the opposite direction. Sometimes the cut leaves some pieces of the tile sticking out, or it's not exactly broken along the line you want. Then filing the edge is a quick and easy way of adjusting the cut and making small alterations without any chance of breaking the tile. And lastly, a very common cut in bathrooms is around pipes. So here I'm using a diamond drill bit to cut a hole around my copper pipe. I found the easiest way to start off drilling holes like this in tiles is to make a ply jig that will hold the bit in the right place until it gets through the glaze. And if your pipes are already connected and you can't simply slip your tile over them like I'm doing here, then cutting the tile midway through the hole means the tile can be placed around the pipe from both sides. Most tiles have quite a smart face, but the edges not so much. So if you want a really professional finish, the probability is you're going to have to use some tile trim. Now, tile trim comes in all kinds of shapes and sizes, but how do you actually install this? I think there's 2 different ways of fitting trim. You either fit it first and then tile into it, where this can get stuck to the wall and literally you're cutting your tiles to fit into the trim. Or if you're using it on a horizontal surface, you may want to fit your tiles and then the last thing you do is fit your trim to it. On this wall I have just one last course to place before I finish with a trim piece. So I draw a line where that will be, which allows me to measure the length of the trim that I need. And this is going to meet another piece in the corner. So I'm using a mitre block and a hacksaw to cut a 45-degree mitre on one end. Once cut all the way through, you can then use a file to take off any burrs and make sure that the part that you see is clean and smooth. With my two pieces cut, before I permanently fix them, I check them for fit in the corner, which I'm happy with. I can then spread my adhesive, keeping a few millimetres shy of the top line of my tiles and trim, which will not only save me clearing up excess adhesive later, but also means I can still see the line where the trim is going to go. I then push the trim into position into the adhesive, but leave it just a few millimetres high at this stage. With this in place, I can now tile the last course as normal. Once all the tiles are in place, I can press down on the trim to fit it snugly against the top of the tiles, making especially sure that the mitred corner is sitting right and looking correct. So the second piece of trim I'm going to be putting in today is along this line, and this is my sort of shower enclosure area above the bath. I'm going to have a shower head here, and on this way I'm going to be putting this trim in first and then tile into it. So I'll glue it in position along this line with tile adhesive. I'll make sure the adhesive is kept low so that the tiles don't conflict with it in the future. And then I'll tile starting on this line and doing any cuts I need on the right hand side. That way it means whether I tile this today or tomorrow doesn't make any difference. I can then place the trim into position and push it back into the wall so it sticks firmly in the adhesive. With this in place, I can tile as usual, starting each course against the trim to make sure that the tiles are tight up against it. Now, my first tip for successful grouting, more than any other tiling process, is preparation. The first thing you need to do is to make sure your tiles are 100% clean. Any bits of adhesive on the face needs to be removed. Once you've checked every single joint and you're 100% happy, then mask off any areas around the perimeter of where you plan to grout to keep them clean, and put down some type of protection on the floor, because grout will inevitably end up dropping off the wall onto the floor during this process. So now that everything's clean and prepared, it's time to mix up some grout. And just another little tip, anything that comes in a powdered format like this or adhesive goes hard not by drying out, but by a chemical reaction. As soon as the water hits that reaction has started, and you've only got a certain amount of time before it starts going hard. So my tip is, don't mix up a whole bag. For the first time, mix up a small amount, see how you get on, and then maybe in the second batch you can mix up some more. But whatever you do, don't mix up a whole bag and end up throwing half of it away. I mix the grout in the same way as tile adhesive, in a bucket with a mechanical stirrer. And the consistency I'm looking for with this is not like the adhesive, which I would describe as peanut butter. I'm looking for something a lot looser and a lot more workable. So with the grout mixed, it's a bit like they say on the films, wipe on and wipe off. My first pass is actually forcing the grout into each one of these lines to make sure it's fully filled with grout. Then I want to take off the excess with a diagonal motion, which means that the edge of my float doesn't end up getting caught in any of these and forcing the grout out. And I don't think there's anything wrong with concentrating on each grout line as long as you work quickly, because you haven't got too much time for this. You can't really do it tile by tile. You've got to be working over a large area. So with the majority of the wall covered, I don't want to wait too long before taking off the excess, because that's going to be a real problem if you leave it on too long. So now I need to try to take off as much as possible, just check the joints as I go along. As I remove the excess, I'm looking for areas I've missed, which at this point are easy to fill with a little bit more material. So I've just left this 5 minutes, and it's amazing how quickly it gains strength. So I think I'm ready for the next cleaning session. So I'm going to use a sponge again, maybe a little bit more water this time, but I'm going to keep changing the water so it's nice and clean. And I want to get off all of that film and all of that grout that's sitting on the surface of the tile before it sets. With the grout now gaining strength, I can be a little bit more robust with the cleaning while washing the sponge out regularly in clean water to help remove any of the grout from it, so I don't just keep spreading it around in circles. And then finally, you can polish your tiles. I'm just using a paper towel here, but you can use a cloth or a duster or whatever. And I would recommend doing that now to perfection, because anything that's left on the surface is progressively getting harder. So if you leave it for tomorrow or the day after, it's just harder and harder to do. So do it straight away, and it means also you can see your final masterpiece, and that I am very happy with. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and it's going to be useful for when you grout your tiles, and I will see you in the next video.